Hello one and all, and welcome to Behind the Glass, the podcast which takes you behind the scenes of the YouTube channel Seen Through Glass, as well as the automotive and social media worlds. I'm your host, Sam, from the YouTube channel Seen Through Glass, and this week I'm joined by Greg Murphy, Australian stock car racing legend. I had the awesome opportunity to sit down and have a chat with Greg whilst I was in New Zealand. Now, the recording actually took place in a friend of mine's house. It was a very hot day. The windows were all open, and you will hear in the background, I don't even know what kind of insects, but a whole lot of insects making a whole lot of noise. But hopefully you can still hear Greg and I chatting away, because my lord was he an interesting guy. As a motorsport fan, I couldn't wait to have the opportunity to pick his brain on what it's like to have driven some of the most important and impressive cars of Australian stock car history. So sit down wherever you're listening to us. Make sure you subscribe for future episodes and enjoy my chat with Greg. Well, let's kick things off with, I guess, an introduction to you and your sort of overview story, because some of my European audience may be a bit naive, may not have heard of you. Sure. and your history. So where did it all begin, and maybe some career highlights in your own personal point of view?
Like many Kiwis, we're sort of funneled down the bottom of the earth down here, and we're a pretty small country, but have certainly got a lot of pedigree when it comes to motorsport and stuff. And I was growing up, you would go to the racetrack with my dad just to watch. We've got some really good racetracks around New Zealand, and we've been known for since way back to have good racing drivers produced out of New Zealand, and also being visited by, back in the 60s and 70s by the best drivers in the world. So the Bruce McLarens and the Denny Holmes and the Chris Amons of the world, used to get the Graham Hills and the Jimmy Clarks and all that down here racing way back when, and we've got a heritage and a history which is very, very special. And so there's a lot of people in New Zealand that follow motorsport, and obviously you're realising quite quickly, I think, the car culture that we have down here, which is something else. And so I, going watching car racing, then I got into karting. No history or backstory behind my family in the sport, but I got into karting with my dad, and we used to go to the racetrack together, and things just evolved through karting for sort of 10 years, and then I managed to get a chance I won a scholarship racing a Formula Ford scholarship here in New Zealand, which got me into cars, and from that point on it sort of went down a path that is not uncommon, I suppose. Opportunities presenting, going off finding money, running in local championships and bits and pieces for a number of years before embarking eventually overseas, and that ended up being in Australia. It was single-seater stuff mainly. I was Formula Ford, Formula Atlantic cars, so 1600 sort of cc wings and slicks powered racing cars, which was predominantly American championship, and then into bigger single-seaters. And my dream was to do IndyCar. I wanted to race Champ Car, so I was chasing that for quite a long time. But sort of the way things worked out, I ended up in Australia and got offered drives, and the professional career began, and the decision was made to stick with Australia, which was a blossoming championship, and the growth of that was very strong at the time. And I've been fortunate to spend a pretty sizable amount of my younger years racing in Australian touring cars, and amongst a few other bits and pieces, but predominantly that. And retired full time. Actually stopped racing full time in 2012, and then stopped racing professionally into the end of 2014, and then took up an opportunity to be involved with the sport on the broadcasting television side of things. So and moved back to New Zealand after living in Australia for sort of 20 odd years. Came back to New Zealand 5 years ago, and commute around backwards and forwards to Australia, but loving life back here in New Zealand, doing things. Have a TV show here that I do with a co-host, which we do 40 shows a year on the Sky Network, which is the pay TV here, and that's around motorsport. review preview, plus we do feature stories on cars and events and other things that are here in New Zealand. So that keeps me busy amongst other things. So that's a nutshell.
There we go. That's summarised in a nutshell. A life in motorsport, I suppose.
Yeah, very much. I never had another job. So until now, where I'm doing TV. So I was very lucky to be involved in the sport from when I left school.
I want to take you back actually to I guess earlier on in your story, you mentioned that the sort of initial dream was IndyCar or Champ Car.
Yep.
So I guess my part of the world, Europe, the dream is usually Formula One.
Yeah.
So why was it IndyCar Champ Car that was your?
I think it was the being realistic. I mean, I was a little bit late getting started, so I didn't drive a racing car till I was 18. And probably back in the 90s, early 90s, that might not have been, too much of an issue. But before I didn't get out of New Zealand to go racing until I was sort of 21, and that was Australia. So, I was sort of moving on by that stage, I suppose. And F1 was, as always, maybe more so now, but it was always so incredibly difficult, and it just seemed always so far away. Whereas Champ Car was a bit more a bit more open, not as sort of this clinical bloody fence that was set up that everyone could look through and but not touch, and that's the way sort of Formula One has continued to be. And whereas IndyCar, Champ Car was a bit more, you could stand right there at the pit wall and bloody almost touch them, and the drivers would talk to you, and it was more low key, and the cars were just fantastic. I think it was my kind of racing was ovals, road courses, street racing, long oval, short oval, all that kind of stuff. It was just the whole discipline. And at the time, amazing race drivers and incredible racing cars that were, as far as budgets and everything went, were much more realistic, and the chance of potentially having to raise the money was more of a, was a much bigger light at the end of the tunnel than what Formula One was, which was pretty much just a glint,
And late 90s, it was really, that was its heyday, wasn't it? I mean,
yeah, mid to late 90s, Champ Car was just on fire. It was incredibly popular. The racing was insane. You had so many amazing names that were, racing in there as well, and the popularity was high. And it was around the time that I suppose I just couldn't make that transition, or couldn't raise the funding to get into the feeder category, which was Indy Lights, and came very close, but it just escaped me there at the last minute. And the commitment to it was going to be, huge, with the sort of $800,000-$900,000, requirement of budget. And then not long after that, obviously the whole IndyCar thing did actually go through its implosion as well. But that was the dream, and but Formula One was always sort of there in the but I never really focused on it, because it was I just didn't really believe that the realistic chance of getting in there was going to happen.
So tough. Well, you said that you didn't end up making the move to Indy Champ Car, but every cloud has a silver lining, because you then effectively became a household name through V8 Supercars. That's kind of what ended up happening, right?
Yeah, well, in the motor racing world, and as far as in New Zealand is a different country, but essentially we're very similar to Australia. It's, and the things we like here are pretty much what they like over there, and the car culture, especially the Australian homegrown built Falcons and Commodores. They sold hundreds of millions of them over the period where they were the biggest selling cars, and I was involved in touring car racing in Australia when Commodore was the biggest selling car and Falcon wasn't far behind, and those two companies were doing incredibly well with market share, and the popularity was enormous, and you sort of look back on it now and really take in how good it was, and to be paid to drive for one of the teams, or paid for by a team in that championship that was heavily funded and supported by the manufacturer, and be a part of that was enormous, and able to make a good career out of that. And so with me amongst a bunch of other guys have been very fortunate to be involved in that.
And so to touch on the Commodore Falcon Ford Holden thing, because I was totally naive and unaware of this before I touched on it. A few people were sending me messages, red versus blue, like, you need to look into this. And I very nearly got punched in the face a couple of times whilst in Australia. Luckily, I just about survived. But sort of, this was basically because back in the 70s, there were these sort of Australian-made muscle cars, and
homologated
for racing. And you had the Falcon made by Ford, Australia, and the Commodore made by Holden. And that continued for 20, 30 years?
Yeah, so the homologation processes and all that kind of changed, but it went through from, Commodore turned up, it was the Tirana before that, in the early 70s, and obviously Ford were making, some pretty cool cars. The GDHO Falcon was, is completely iconic. A lot of the Tiranas are iconic, and then Commodore turned up in 70, what was that, 77, 78? Geez, I should really know exactly. I'm going to get shot down in flames.
We can do a voiceover later.
Became the GM, touring car, and just is the most successful touring car of all time, and because its length of its longevity as being a sales success, and alongside Falcon at the same time, and the manufacturers were, back in the day when we used to say win on Sunday, sell on Monday, it was incredibly relevant and real, and the going head to head there, the battle was strong, and motorsport, the crowds that used to turn up, Bathurst, which is the the epitome of Australian car racing, it was you had to be involved in it. Those two manufacturers were committed, as was others at the time. Nissan was involved in there heavily with the GTR through and other versions of the Skyline through the late 80s into the 90s, and hugely successful, obviously, and other brands as well. Volvo was in there at the time for a period. BMW was racing in the series as well, very successfully. But Group A through the 80s, mid, late, early 90s was huge around the world. So it was a world thing, and world touring cars and rounds of the World Touring Car Championship were run in Australia with the Sierra Cosworth and all these other cars as well, and so hugely successful, and so there was that period through there where everyone was having a crack, but GM was using Commodore and Ford for a long time Falcon, and then the Sierra sort of crept in, and then back into the early 90 sort of early 90s when the Falcon became again, because the rules started to change, Group A was disappearing, and then Falcon came back in I think 93 it was, when it became the car, because that's what Ford were selling, and it wasn't about the world anymore, it was about Australia, and then from there 93 onwards it was just Commodore versus Falcon, and the war.
Well, that's it. I mean, the people are so loyalty and passion, and I mean it can draw blood like this.
Yep, absolutely. There's been fights. Countless, endless amounts of. Not so much now. I think we've sort of toned it down.
It's calmed down a bit.
But through the period where I was in the mid 90s racing for Holden and being a part of that, it was serious.
I asked you when you turned up, but back in that day, if one of your friends said, "Oh, let's go for a drive," and they'd come in a Ford, would you have had to gone, "Sorry, mate, not
pretty
a chance"?
Much, absolutely.
Really?
You wouldn't want to be seen. Especially when you were, I was fortunate to be a part of the factory Holden team for a number of years, and you just wouldn't.
Yeah, that wouldn't be worth it.
Not happen at all.
Well, you mentioned Bathurst, so. Is it a stretch to say that Bathurst 1000 is the sort of Le Mans of Australia?
Yeah, I think
it's
so.
Sort of that big an event, right?
Yeah, it is.
And 1,000 laps or 1,000 kilometres? Okay, 1,000 kilometres.
So 161 laps as it is now, and it is. It's and it's not like it's just a race that's recognised obviously here. I mean, if you're a motorsport fan, an international motorsport fan, you'll know what Bathurst is, and we as of only just a couple of days ago, was the Bathurst 12-hour race, which is GT3 cars, and that's grown over the years with factory. A lot of the factories have brought their cars down there because of the iconic stature of that racetrack.
Absolutely.
And it's you've got drivers, incredibly talented international professional drivers who have been just itching to have the opportunity to come down there and race, and I think the 12-hour with the GT3 race cars has given a lot of drivers that opportunity to do that, who wouldn't have been able to step into a supercar group and get a co-drive to be a part of it.
Yeah.
So it will continue to be the pinnacle of our racing calendar, for a very, very long time.
But does it live up to the hype? It's not
Yes.
it's not a Monaco in terms of glitz and glamour.
No.
It's actually a fantastic track to drive.
It is a proper racetrack, and it's evolved over the years, and certainly changed the safety and all that kind of stuff. But the shape of the racetrack has not changed, and it still has every single bit of character that it had 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. Every bit of character is still there, and the commitment to drive around there flat out is a serious one, and it's not for the faint-hearted, but it delivers brilliant racing, and I've been lucky enough to be participate in that for many years, and it's one of those races now that you go to that you aren't racing in, and it leaves a bit of a tingle down your spine, and certainly you have a lot of reflection, and when you see the race start now, and the work I do now, I work with the television of the supercars, so I'm there in the pit lane working, and it's not an enjoyable time seeing that race start and know you're not a part of it anymore.
I can imagine. Well, you're a humble guy, because you say you participated. Please correct me if I'm wrong, because I could be, but did you not win the Bathurst 1000 4 times?
Yes.
And you completed this lap of the gods, the first man.
You need to caveat this with the fact that I did not call it this.
He definitely named it himself.
Yeah, thank you.
But you were the first man to lap under 2 minutes and 7 seconds at the time. So it was, and still, I mean, if you Google your name, this is what comes up everywhere, and it's heralded as really one of the most almighty laps in all of motorsport. So just to touch on a couple of things there. Firstly, at the time, whilst you were driving, or even in the moments afterwards, did you think you had done a fantastic lap? Were you feeling different to any other lap you'd driven around there?
No, it's a bizarre thing, because you certainly look back on it and start to sort of remember things and feelings that you didn't really notice at the time. It's one of those moments. And listen, it's a very special thing that I have on my resume, that every driver in the world wants to have something that I suppose that they might be remembered by, and lots of drivers win championships and they win special races and all these kinds of things, and I never won the Supercar Championship, but for a period there I was very competitive and very good race teams and good teammates and all those kinds of things, and but this moment was was one of those moments that happen every now and then, and I've, for whatever reason, happened to be the bloke that was at the right place at the right time with the right stuff to achieve it. And I always had an affinity with the place, because I grew up, I didn't get there, I didn't go to Bathurst until 1994. And the first time I ever went there was to actually race my first Bathurst 1000, and but growing up through mainly through the 80s, the iconic stature of that event was the same here in New Zealand. So it's probably probably the only live motor race that was on television in New Zealand through many years of the 80s. So sitting in front of the TV for 7 hours, 8 hours straight, watching the icons of the likes of Peter Brock and Jim Richards and Larry Perkins and John Bowe, Dick Johnson, all these racing this race. That was just the weekend for me all year that I waited for. So to have the chance to race there was incredibly special. So, and I always felt honoured every time, no matter what. It was like it was you had to respect the mountain, and you should feel honoured to have to have that opportunity to be there, and so I always went there with that kind of feeling and vibe, and felt very lucky and fortunate to have the chance, and always treated it with that kind of level of respect, and so 2003 was 12 months after obviously 12 months after the 2002 race, where obviously where I actually had a something else that I was very much remembered by, and that was to be given maybe the first 5-minute penalty ever in the world. So if you Google my name and you see the lap of the gods, it's a highlight.
Scroll down
12 months earlier, there'll be another one from 2002, which was a serious low light when I was given a 5-minute penalty for driving away from our pit bay while the fuel hose was still attached. And anyway, that happened through certain things, all as they do, pieces of the puzzle all conspiring at the same time to allow that to happen. Anyway, I was given, and the team were given a 5-minute penalty, which essentially that's over 2 laps at Bathurst.
Okay.
So your race is done. And we were incredibly competitive in 2002 and 2001 in the Kmart racing team that I was a part of, and so 2002 we were very much on a chance to be on the podium at least, but also maybe win that race as well that day, as were many others. But that happened, 5-minute penalty, so I was rather incensed by that, and showed my frustrations, and so that's gone down in folklore amongst other things.
Amazing.
And then, so 12 months later I turned up there, and we had a bit of a joke about the fact that it had happened, and I spent some time in the 5-minute penalty. I got out of the car and spent some time in a portaloo that was inside the garage, because it was like needed somewhere to go to vent some anger.
I can only imagine.
And might as well empty the bladder at the same time before I had to get back in the car.
Sure.
So 12 months later, I think we're looking back, I didn't think it at the time, but there was certainly a bit of subliminal kind of vibe around what had happened that I was using as a tool maybe to make me do something
extra special,
maybe, and I was using that energy, maybe that negative energy, and because of what had happened, it was like you want to prove something, and it was one of those weekends where when we turned up at Bathurst, and with an amazing crew, the same people I'd turned up with 2 years before, same team, and you put the car on the racetrack, and pretty much we don't touch it for the rest of the weekend, because it's like, well, I don't really know what to do, because I'm still finding speed, and you're fastest in the first couple of practice sessions, and you're just getting faster, and then you go into the next day, and you're fastest in one of the practice sessions, and then you go into qualifying, and the most amazing qualifying, one of the really special ones that happened, it was between myself, John Bowe, and Mark Scaife, 2 other very, very much icons of Australian motorsport. We battled out in qualifying to be separated at the end of qualifying, 3 of us by 1/10 of a second, and all 3 of us for the first time ever into the 207 second bracket. So 207.9, and it was like, wow, 3 of us are in there, and I was on provisional pole with the shootout to come on Saturday, the top 10 shootout, which is again another very special part of the Bathurst weekend, is the iconic top 10 shootout. And so we went into the top 10 shootout, last to run, so the 10th fastest in qualifying runs first, down to first. And it's just one of those things that just managed to happen. It's a moment and a part of the weekend that I always broke down as being, right, the top 10 shootout, you want to be in it for one, so qualifying was super important, and then once you're in it, this is a piece of again history that I've watched and admired for a long time, the ability to go and drive a racing car with nobody else on the racetrack, all eyes, television, crowd, everybody watching you do this lap, and it's an honour again to get the chance to do it. So it's like, well, anyone that says, oh well, it's a long race tomorrow, I'm happy to start from 6th on the grid, well,
you don't share that.
I don't share that. That's just an absolute rogue rubbish, and anyone that says that and uses that as a terrible cliche quote, should actually take a look at themselves in a room of mirrors, because it's just rubbish. So
I appreciate that.
You do the shootout to be on pole, and every year you try. This year, for some reason, it seemed to happen quite easily, albeit you're in this zone. You're in a zone, and I don't know if I've ever actually felt that, been in that zone ever before, so prepared and so willing and able and committed and confident. And it just it came up.
Just came through. And I'm just sort of fascinated because I'm not a frustrated racing driver, but I would love to have been a racing driver. Not necessarily that lap, but when you get in the car and you're going for ultimate lap time, is there a certain amount of subliminal in terms of you are just driving, as focused and as prepared as possible, or are you still sort of talking to yourself in terms of, right, there's the 80-meter board brake, okay, turning, oh no, I missed that apex. Like, how much of a narrative is playing out inside of your head, and how much of it is just kind of robot focus?
When it's really when you are actually got in the zone and everything is there that you need, and you've got that confidence with the race car and all that kind of stuff, I think it is quite subliminal. And it needs to be quite robotic and muscle memory, and just everything happens at probably at a slower speed in the way you actually apply and do everything, and that doesn't happen very often. I think when so like 2003, you look at that and it happened, you're like, wow, okay, that's cool. So again, 2004 we turn up and I go, well, I'll just do it again.
Yeah, sure, that'll be easy.
Didn't happen.
Okay, so it's just things coming together.
Yeah,
sometimes it's the sweet spot, sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's an amazing accolade, but you have many, and as you say, I'm sure it's great to have that, but you've proved yourself in many other areas as well, rather than a one-lap wonder. But an amazing thing for any of you listening, just get online and search out the lap of the gods, and you'll be pretty blown away. But let's come forward a little bit. I want to touch on road cars, because you've turned up today in I guess sort of iconic final hurrah to the Aussie muscle car. But throughout the years, I mean, were you ever into your road cars? Do you enjoy road driving?
I do.
Yeah. Okay.
I do. I'm very much a car guy. I love cars. I love reading car magazines. I love seeing what's coming. I love understanding what's in them. I like knowing if they're good or bad. I like driving them to find out what they're like. And it doesn't matter really what it is. I'm pretty interested and have been forever. I've had a strong association with HSV, Holden Special Vehicles, which have over the years delivered a small number of their cars to the UK, and they're all V8 powered, front engine, rear wheel drive, proper Aussie muscle cars.
It's got a proper stance to it.
And they do, and they've done an amazing. And I've had a strong association with HSE for 20 odd years, which I've really enjoyed over the time. Seeing them evolve, and as the products from Holden evolve, they evolve, but also what other car makers have done over the years, and the technology that's changed, so I'm a huge fan, and I've been very fortunate over the years, and certainly since I've been back in New Zealand with this Sky Speed show that I do with on Sky, the paid TV here, get the chance to drive a lot of stuff and do stories around a lot of things, and the latest and last thing that we did in the late last year, and certainly the most incredible car and rewarding car that I've driven probably to date is the McLaren Senna. So have spent a bit of time in that. We made a bit of a video about that in relationship with the two names, the McLaren, obviously Bruce McLaren and Senna, and I spent a fair bit of time at Hampton Downs in the Senna recently, and it's one of those cars that yes, McLaren have gone and built this, this brilliant piece of engineering, designed for, one thing. It's certainly not a beautiful car.
No, we agree on that.
No, and everyone will say that, but you've got to stand there and look at it for a long time to appreciate what's been created, and you can do that with a lot of cars. There's a lot of cars that have been over the years, but the Senna is I suppose the latest incarnation of a lot of manufacturers doing incredible things, and we're going to see a few more turn up in the near future, with the Valkyrie turning up and all that kind of thing to do certain things. So I get so much satisfaction and enjoyment out of doing that, because everything's got its idiosyncrasies. Everything's a little bit different, and the way manufacturers go about doing their things, and that's a real joy, a real joy. So fortunate to do that, and that won't change. I'm excited about continuing to have the chance. And we here in New Zealand, we don't go without. We receive everything pretty much that in certain numbers, not as many as other parts of the world, but pretty much everything that comes out these days that's of
you can get your holds on somehow.
We can pretty much get our hands on, and which is really, really cool. And we've, as I said before, our culture here is enormous, and the love of cars is something I think per capita you'd struggle maybe to find as strong anywhere else in the world.
I have picked up on it. I mean, I've only been here now for maybe 36 hours, but I've already got that real sense. And just driving on public roads, I just keep seeing really interesting stuff coming the way. Whether it's brand new McLarens through to just old tuned up muscle cars or whatever it might be. It's just everyone's trying to drive something interesting. So on a sort of slightly quick fire basis, if you started racing, you said around 18 or so, a little bit later. Did you have a road car before that? What was your very first road car?
Datsun 1200 Triple S. So
I think I'd have to Google that, but
and I've got one in my shed.
No way.
Because there's a story there, which is so Datsun 1200 Triple S was Google it. Very small 4-door saloon. It was actually became a very popular racing car down this part of the world back in the 70s, because it was a great little handling little car, great little engine, and the Triple S was a special version that actually was done only here in New Zealand. So they threw in a different camshaft, bit of a racy camshaft, and the little engine, 1200 cc's, a couple of 40 mil Delortos on the side of it, exhaust, a few other bits and pieces, 12-inch wheels, alloy wheels, and all this kind of stuff. And it was a bit of a little iconic car. So I had one of those, and unfortunately it came to a savage end against a tree.
Often does when it's a first car.
And which I regretted terribly. It changed actually my attitude to driving. I was, as we all were back in 17, 18 years old, better than what we thought we were, better than what we were. Of course. And I thought I was pretty hot shit behind the wheel. And
well, it turned out you were, but maybe at that time you just weren't quite.
At that time I certainly wasn't. And it was a moment that I was reflect on a lot, and has been a big part of, I suppose, my story to sort of help and be a part of trying to be a road safety advocate in New Zealand, and I do a lot of road safety stuff here to try and change things, and I tell that story about what I did that day. So that was my first car, and then quite fortuitously, I think for a very long time, I never owned any because because I didn't need to, because I was lucky to be have company cars and provided cars for a long time, but I've got a few, and my W1 parked out there that we were talking about before, which is the last hurrah from HSV, sits in the shed, so that sits there, and
it's kind of a prized car.
Yeah, it is sort of thing, because I think it's going to be a bit of an investment, I suppose, but it is also a very special thing that I struggle to be able to justify driving. But I got a little Datsun 1200 as well, and a couple of muscle cars and things, 60s American muscle cars.
Super cool. Well, look, I really appreciate you coming down and having a chat. I think it's
great to see you.
No, it's fascinating to hear your story and learn a bit more about the motorsport here.
You're going to have plenty of fascinating stories, I'm sure, on your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's great to get started here and learn a bit more. So thanks again, and everyone, as I say, make sure to get on your Google, get on your YouTube, and look up the various things we've been discussing, because it's all fascinating. And we'll catch you soon for the next episode.